What are the basic loss conditions in Twitter Giant? That is, what state-based actions exist in the game that would cause you to lose as a team? And you can type your answers in Discord. I see a couple people typing. No one's yet put the most common state-based action. There we go. So if the team has 0 or less life, they lose. If a team has 15 poison counters, they lose. And if a player is unable to draw when required to do so, then they lose. So we're going to have some scenarios here, and let's look at our contestants. So on team active player, we have Andrew and Ariana. And on team non-active player, we have Napoleon and Ninetails. So we're going to be seeing these teams playing against each other throughout this presentation. So here we are. The teams have sat down across from a table at each other. And Andrew has 20 creatures, which is pretty impressive in Twitter Giant, and also controls Epic Struggle. So what happens in Andrew's upkeep? I'm going to give you some choices here. Either Andrew wins by himself, or both Andrew and Ariana win, or no one wins and the game continues. So go ahead and type your answers in Discord, or you can say like 1, 2, or 3, or A, B, C. The answer is both Andrew and Arya win the game. And the reason is that, as Jeffrey said earlier, if either player on a team wins the game, the entire team wins the game. Next scenario, Andrew activates Door to Nothingness, targeting Napoleon. So what happens? Does Napoleon lose by himself, or do Napoleon and Ninetails both lose the game? Or maybe nobody loses and the game continues. So just like with winning the game, if either player on a team loses the game, then the entire team loses the game. Ninetails has Platinum Angel, which says you can't lose the game and your opponents can't win the game. And Andrew casts Mind Sculpt to mill out Napoleon, who has only 6 cards left in his library. So what happens in Napoleon and Ninetails' next draw step? Do Andrew and Ariana win the game? Does nobody win and the game continues? Or maybe Napoleon loses, but Ninetails continues to play? And again, put your answer in Discord, or if you think none of these are correct, you can also say that. The answer is that nobody wins, the game continues, because if an effect would prevent a player from losing the game, the entire player's team cannot lose the game. So Platinum Angel protects both Napoleon and Ninetails. The next set of rules we're going to look at is life totals. So as we know, both teams start with 30 life. Suppose when Ariana and Andrew are playing, Ariana casts Beacon of Immortality targeting Andrew. What is Andrew's new life total? Is it 30? Is it 45? Is it something else? This answer has been different in the past, which is one of the reasons I'm giving you this example. The answer is 60. A player's life total is equal to the team's life total. So initially, Andrew's life total is 30. If his life total is doubled, it becomes 60, and so does the team's life total. Suppose Andrew has Vampire Nighthawk, which has lifelink, and Ariana has Ageless Entity, which says whenever you gain life, put that many counters on Ageless Entity. So after Vampire Nighthawk deals combat damage, how many counters, excuse me, how many counters does Ageless Entity get? And keep in mind, Vampire Nighthawk is a 2-power creature. So your choices are 0, 1, or 2. Or if you want to be creative, you can also come up with another number. Scott, I'll get to your question when we're done with this particular scenario. The answer is 0. The reason is that gaining life happens to each player individually, and then the result is applied to the team's life total. So Andrew gains life from Vampire Nighthawk's lifelink, but Ariana does not gain life, even though the team's life total goes up too. And since Ariana does not gain life, she does not put any counters on Ageless Entity. Scott had a question about the previous scenario with doubling life totals. I don't want to go too far into it because I generally prefer that people forget old obsolete rules, but yeah, the answer would have been 45 if I'd asked this 10 years ago. Okay, now Napoleon and Ninetails are playing, and Ninetails controls Platinum and Imperion. Ninetails has something of a fascination for Platinum. And Napoleon casts Resupply. So what happens? The answer is, one answer is Napoleon gains 6 life. The other answer is Napoleon gains 0 life. And I'll just tell you right now, there are no other options. The answer is Napoleon gains 0 life, because if an effect says a player can't gain life, no player on that player's team can gain life. And since Napoleon, since the Napoleon and Ninetails' life total can't change, that means they cannot gain life. Although they also can't lose life, so it works both ways. So we have these two teams playing against each other, and Ariana casts Sizzle. How much life does Napoleon and Ninetails' team lose? Do they lose 0, 3, or 6, or maybe some other number? The answer is 6, because Napoleon loses 3 life from taking 3 damage from Sizzle, and so does Ninetails. And so 3 plus 3, or minus 3 minus 3, is applied to their life total, and they lose a total of 6 life. Andrew controls. Ariana controls 5 soldier tokens, and Napoleon controls 2 soldier tokens. And poor Ninetails is just shut out of the token game, and there are no other creatures here. Ariana casts Biorhythm. What does each team's life total become? I'll go back so you can take a look at the board. So does their life total become the new life total become the total number of creatures they have, which would mean Ariana and Andrew are at 8 and Napoleon and Ninetails are at 2, or the smallest number of creatures they have, which would put Andrew and Ariana at 3 and Napoleon and Ninetails at 0, Or each team chooses for themselves, and depending what they choose, that will affect the life total. Or the caster of biorhythm chooses. So Ariana will choose which teammate is affected on each team. It's a little easier when I give you choices, right? Oh, Elaine, if that question was on your L1 test, I really feel bad for you. I don't think this is really an L1 question. The answer is that each team chooses which of them is affected. And this is the rule. Anytime a player's an effect sets a life total, sets the team's life total to a number, or sets a player's life total to a number, the team will choose which of the two players on the team is affected, and the other person is not affected. So the new life totals are going to be 5 and 2, presuming that each team makes the optimal choice. The next set of rules we're going to look at is combat, because this is one of the more complicated areas of Two-Headed Giant, and also a part of the rules that differs significantly from 1 versus 1. So here we have our two teams. Andrew has Elite Vanguard, and Ariana has Sarah Angel, and Napoleon has Shivan Dragon, and once again, Ninetales is shut out. So these questions are just going to be true, false. I'm just going to ask you to put in Discord whether you think the statement is true or the statement is false. Here's the first statement. Andrew has a combat phase. When it's finished, Ariana has a combat phase. True or false? This one is false. I mentioned that earlier that the teams take shared turns. That means Andrew and Ariana take their combat phase together. Second statement, in the declare attacker step, Andrew chooses whether Elite Vanguard attacks Napoleon or Ninetales, and Ariana decides whether Sarah Angel attacks Napoleon or Ninetales. This one is true. Although the two players attack as a team, for each attacking creature, they have to announce which opponent or planeswalker that creature is attacking. So they don't attack the other team, they attack an individual player on that team. Third statement. Napoleon's Shivan Dragon can only block creatures that attacked Napoleon and not creatures that attacked Ninetales. True or false? This one is false. Creatures controlled by the defending players can block any attacking creatures, and they'll declare all their blocks together. Now let's take a look at a situation where Ninetales has Reverence, which says creatures with power 2 or less can't attack you. And Andrew has Elite Vanguard. Can Elite Vanguard attack Napoleon? Apparently I don't have any choices because it's just a yes-no question. So Reverence's ability says creatures can't attack you, and the term you refers to its controller. So Elite Vanguard cannot attack Ninetales, but it can still attack Napoleon because Reverence doesn't protect Napoleon, and creatures attack individual players, not teams. Ariana has Alley Grifters, and Ninetales has finally a creature. So when Ariana attacks Napoleon, of course, Ninetales can block because a creature can block for either teammate. But who discards a card to Alley Grifter's ability? Your choices are only Napoleon discards, or only Ninetales discards, or each of the defending players discards, or Ariana chooses one of the two players and that player discards. Yeah, we're done with the true false questions. I only had a few at the very beginning. So whenever an attacking creature has an ability that refers to a defending player, it's always the player that the creature is attacking. So even though Ninetales' creature is blocking, Ninetales is not considered the defending player for purposes of Ally Grifter's ability. So therefore, Napoleon will be the player who discards a card. Andrew controls Rushwood Dryad. Rushwood Dryad has Forest Walk. So when does that make Rushwood Dryad unblockable? I'll just tell you the answer. It's unblockable if the opponent it's attacking controls a forest. Ariana has Monstrous Hound, which can only attack if Ariana controls more lands than the defending player. So when can it attack? And just like Rushwood Dryad, it can attack if Ariana controls more lands than the player that it is attacking. Always remember that anytime an ability of an attacking creature refers to the defending player, it's always the player that it is attacking. Or if it's attacking a planeswalker, then the controller of the planeswalker that it is attacking. We're going to have Rushwood Dryad again, but this time Ariana has Avensquire, which is also attacking. So which of these two attacking creatures get the bonus for Exalted that's on Avensquire? Is it both creatures, or neither creature, or just Rushwood Dryad, or just Avensquire? So Exalted looks for creatures that are attacking alone. That has a specific meaning that it means it is the only creature that is attacking. So if there are multiple players that have attacking creatures, if only one creature among all those players is attacking, it's attacking alone. If more than one creature's attack, even if they're controlled by different players, none of them are attacking alone. So no creatures get the bonus for Exalted. Andrew has Mog Flunkies, which cannot attack or block alone, and it's enchanted by Infectious Bloodlust, so it attacks each turn if able. Ariana has a Johnny's Pridemate. So I'm going to show you some legal sets of attackers, and I'd like you to tell me what are the legal sets of attackers that can be declared here. I'm going to leave this on the screen for a moment just so you can reread the cards and make sure that you understand what's going on. So both Mog Flunkies and a Johnny's Pridemate, so both creatures, or no creatures, or just Mog Flunkies, or just a Johnny's Pridemate. So this is kind of a multiple choice question because any or all of these questions, any or all of these answers, or none of these answers could be correct. Anyone else want to try and answer at this? Well, I don't see anybody else typing. So let's look at the rules for declaring attackers. First, because this is 2 at a giant, the team has 1 attack, and of course, the set of attacking creatures must be legal as a whole. And Alex is going to talk more about this in her presentation. So here is part of 508.1, which basically says that when you're declaring attackers, you must have been the maximum number of requirements that's possible. Requirements say that a creature must attack or that it must attack if some condition is met. Similarly, if there are restrictions that say a creature can't attack or that it can't attack unless some condition is met, all of those restrictions must be met. None of those restrictions can be violated. If a restriction is violated, then the attack is illegal. So infectious bloodlust, which says the creature attacks each turn if able, is a requirement. The ability of Mog Flunkies, which says it cannot attack or block alone, is a restriction. So we cannot violate this restriction, and we must meet this requirement if possible. So the maximum number of requirements that could be fulfilled here is 1, because there's only one requirement. And therefore, the only legal set of attackers is both creatures, because any other set of attackers will either violate Mog Flunky's restriction or will not meet infectious bloodlust's requirement. Declaring no attackers is not legal because it violates, it does not meet the requirement of infectious bloodlust. So if you can meet one requirement, but the set of attackers meets 0 requirements, then it is not a legal set of attackers. And again, Alex will talk about this in some more detail in her presentation on combat. Andrew has Shivan Dragon, Napoleon has Sphere of Law, and Ninetails has Orbs of Warding. So Shivan Dragon is red, which is really the only relevant part here. Sphere of Law and Orbs of Warding both have damage prevention effects. So Andrew attacks Ninetails with Shivan Dragon. How much will Napoleon and Ninetails' life total be reduced by? Is it always 4, or always 3, or always 2, or 3 or 4, depending on the choice that Andrew and Ariana make, or 3 or 4, depending on the choice that Napoleon and Ninetails make? Yeah, assuming that Shivan Dragon is not using any of its abilities, it's just a 5-power red creature. Robert, I'll get to your question after we're done with this scenario. So Shivan Dragon, since it's not blocked, is going to deal damage to the player it's attacking, which is Ninetails. Orbs of Warding will prevent 1 damage to Ninetails, but Sphere of Law will not prevent any damage because it only prevents damage to Napoleon. Therefore, Ninetails takes 4 damage. No choices to be made here. Answer is always 4. And I'm going to go back briefly to the Mog Flunky scenario. I don't want to get too far into it because it's not really specific to Mog Flunkies, or rather, not specific to Two-Headed Giant. And Alex, like I said, can talk about it more in her scenario. Cards like tax cards like Ghostly Prison, that in general that prevent a creature from attacking unless they pay the cost, create a restriction if the attacking player does not pay the cost. So if they don't pay the cost, then the restriction prevents the creature from attacking and cannot be violated. And if you have more questions about effects like Ghostly Prison, I would encourage you to bring it up with Alex. Okay, next scenario. Andrew has Sarah Angel. Napoleon has Malira. And I'll give you a moment to read Malira. If you were judging or playing Modern within the past several years, you're probably at least somewhat familiar with Malira. So Andrew attacks Ninetails with Sarah Angel. And Ariana casts Tainted Strike, targeting Sarah Angel. What happens as combat damage resolves? And here are your options. Sarah Angel deals normal damage and Ninetales loses 5 life. Sarah Angel deals poison damage and Ninetales gains 5 poison counters. Sarah Angel deals poison damage, but Ninetales gains no poison counters. So what do you think? No damage, no poison isn't actually not one of the options I gave you, but I probably should add that to this for the next time I present. So anytime there's an effect that says a player can't get poison counters, it means no players on that player's team can get poison counters. So Melira says Napoleon cannot get poison counters, but that also prevents Ninetales from getting poison counters. Nonetheless, Sarah Angel still has Infect, so it's not going to deal normal damage. It's only going to deal poison damage. So it deals the 5 poison damage, but that damage doesn't do anything to the other team because poison damage doesn't reduce life, and Napoleon and Ninetales are not allowed to get poison counters. Zach asks, does Melira not remove Infect after it gets added? Now, this is actually a layers question. So Melira has an ability that says all creatures lose Infect, which applies in layer 6. And Tainted Strike has an ability that says the creature gains Infect, which is also in layer 6. And because they both apply in layer 6, you use timestamps to see which effect wins. You apply them in timestamp order. So first, Sarah Angel loses Infect, then it gains Infect. And the result is it has Infect when it deals damage. Thanks, Toby. We have multiple presentations on layers. The last section I want to talk about is the concept of shared turns. So here's an example. Napoleon controls Sulfuric Vortex. At the beginning of every player's upkeep, Sulfuric Vortex deals 2 damage to that player. At the beginning of Andrew and Ariana's upkeep, how much damage does their team take as a whole? Is it 0, 2, or 4? Or some other number? Well, everyone figured out that it was 4. The reason is, whenever there is an ability that triggers at the beginning or end of a player's phase or step, like Sulfuric Vortex's upkeep trigger, if it refers to that player or that opponent, it triggers once for each such player. So Sulfuric Vortex triggers once for Andrew and once for Ariana. Therefore, they take 4 damage. Suppose instead of Sulfuric Vortex, Napoleon controls Luminarch Ascension. Says at the beginning of each opponent's end step, if you didn't lose life this turn, you put a quest counter on Luminarch Ascension. So if Napoleon didn't lose life this turn, how many quest counters does Napoleon put onto Luminarch Ascension? Is it 0, 1, or 2? Okay, Zach, we'll go back to the previous question as soon as we're done with Luminarch Ascension. So in this case, we have an ability that triggers at the beginning or end of a player's phase or step, but it doesn't refer to that player or that opponent. Therefore, it triggers only once. And Napoleon puts 1 quest counter on Luminarch Ascension. This is also something that changed within the last few years. If I'd asked you this question 10 years ago, the answer would have been different. So Zach had a question about Sulfuric Vortex, and I want to go back to that. Zach, both of these questions are referring to abilities that trigger at the end of a player's phase or step. So something that says at the beginning of a player's upkeep, at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, at the beginning of each opponent's combat, and so forth. Anything that refers to a phase or step as the trigger point. Then, if it refers to that player or that opponent, it will trigger once for each such player or opponent. If it doesn't, like Luminarch Ascension, just says if you didn't lose life, you can put a counter on. If it does not refer to a player or opponent, it triggers only once. Scott asks, is there a rule of thumb for you? If something says you, like essentially Luminarch Ascension does, then if it does not use the terminology of that player or that opponent, it triggers only once. So Luminarch Ascension says at the beginning of each opponent's end step, so it is a phase or step trigger, you may do something. So therefore it triggers once because it does not mention that player. Ill-gotten inheritance is another example of something that will trigger well, it triggers only once because it's at the beginning of your upkeep. If it's at each player's upkeep, it would still trigger only once because it's not referring to that player or that opponent. Any other questions about these two cards? Okay. So Andrew controls Paradox Haze. What is the structure of their team's beginning phase? Is it they take an untap step together, then an upkeep together, then a second upkeep together, and then a draw step together? Or do they take an untap together, then an upkeep together, then Andrew takes his second upkeep, and then they take a draw step together? Or they take an untap together, then an upkeep together, then Andrew has a second upkeep, then Ariana has a second upkeep, and then a draw step together. That was a lot of words. So anytime a player gets an additional phase or step, or turn for that matter, the player's team takes the extra phase or step or turn. So they'll take an untap together, then a first upkeep together, then a second upkeep together, and then a draw step together. Let's bring Napoleon and Ninetails back because Napoleon controls Fate Spinner. So how does Andrew and Ariana's turn proceed? I'll give you a moment to read Fate Spinner before I give you your options. Fate Spinner is a mean card. So first option is, in their upkeep, they make a single choice, and whatever choice they make, they skip that step together. Second option is, in their upkeep, they make a separate choice, and Andrew skips the step or phase he chooses, and Ariana skips the step or phase that she chooses. Third option is, in their upkeep, they make a separate choice, and both skip whatever steps or phases are chosen. Jeffrey, you might be reading a little bit more into this team's relationship than you have grounds for, but that's okay. So anytime an effect causes a player to skip a phase or a step, the player's entire team does so. And because, as we saw, this is a trigger that triggers at the beginning of an opponent's step or phase, in this case the upkeep, and refers to that player, it will trigger once for each player. So each of them will make a choice, and then they'll skip whatever phases or steps were chosen. Robert, I did see your question, but I have something coming up which I think is going to answer that. So I'm not going to get to it yet, but if you still have a question about it after we see that later scenario, then just remind me. Ninetales has a face-down morph creature and turns it face up. And it is Brine Elemental, which has a trigger when it's turned face up. Each opponent skips their next untap step. So after that ability resolves, for how many turns do Andrew and Ariana skip their untap step? Is it 1, 2, or some other number? The answer is 1, because anytime there's a single effect that causes more than one player on the same team to skip the same phase or step, the team skips only that phase or step. So even though Brine Elemental is affecting each opponent, because they have a shared turn, they're going to skip that one untap step together, and just that one untap step. If you created 2 triggers, would it skip 2? It depends on how that was worded. It's a little hard to answer that question without seeing what the specific templating was. Okay, and in this scenario, Ariana casts Worst Fears, which says you control target player during that player's next turn, targeting Ninetales. So whom does she control during the next turn? Is it just Napoleon, or just Ninetales, or both players, or neither player? Kiari, would you say that card is your worst fear? The rule is that any effect that causes one player to control another means that they control that entire team. So Ariana will control both players during their next turn. Any questions? Zach asked if these questions are gotchas or common interactions. I don't know that they're all necessarily common. Like, I don't really expect to see Fate Spinner played at many two-headed giant matches. But they all are there to illustrate fundamental rules about two-headed giant. So even if you don't see that particular interaction, the effects are fairly common. Like, you might not see Worst Fears specifically, but you will see eventually. You will see effects that make one player control another player. Or you'll see cards like Luminarch Ascension or Sulfuric Vortex that have triggers at the beginning of a player's phase or step, and so forth. Thank you, Jeffrey. I'm doing very well, and I hope all of you are too. So first I'm going to answer Scott's question about Wound Reflection and Pain Magnification, and I actually need to look up those cards, because I don't know the wording offhand. Well, I guess actually we could use that Discord bot. So Wound Reflection triggers at the beginning of a step, but it does not refer to that opponent or this or that player. So it's going to resolve, or it's going to trigger only once and resolve once. And the effect is each opponent will lose life equal to the life they lost turn. Now remember that life loss happens to individual players just like life gain does. So for example, if one player takes combat damage, only that player is losing life from the creature, and Wound Reflection will not do anything to the other player. And for pain magnification, it's somewhat similar in that if an opponent, the players take damage individually. So if a particular player is dealt damage, then they'll discard a card. And if the other player is not dealt damage, like if it's a combat damage, it's only dealing damage to one player, then they're not affected. And let's look at Paradox Haze. So Paradox Haze enchants a specific player, and it only triggers for that player. So it's not although that's actually it is triggering at the beginning of is triggering at the beginning of a particular player's upkeep, but it's not at the beginning of each player's upkeep. So it's only going to trigger once because it triggers at the beginning of Andrew's upkeep, but not the beginning of Ariana's upkeep, even though they're really the same upkeep. Jeffrey, I see your question, but I'm not sure what you're referring to when you say it. If you copy that trigger, do you mean the wound reflection trigger? Or the Paradox Haze trigger? If you have something like Stronic Resonator, which copies triggered abilities, it basically just it's like putting that trigger on the stack again, except you're not putting it onto the stack, you just resolve it. So I have a quiz, a 5-question quiz for you, and I want to get to that before our time is up. But I'll be happy to answer questions during the break as well. So I'm going to put in the site here and the code. If you go to menti.com and put in this code, you should be able to see the quiz I have set up for you. I find it personally easier to do this on a laptop or desktop, but if you want to do it on your phone, that's fine. So I will be showing you the text of the questions on Discord because my screen is still being shared. And you'll see the same text in Menti, but Menti is a little smaller. So if it's hard for you to read it there, just go to Discord and read it there. Okay, so here's the first question. The answer was 2. Because riot control prevents damage to Ninetales, but Napoleon is the one being dealt damage by the attacking creature. Oops. Here's the second question. So each answer is a list of legal sets of attackers. Only one of these is correct. The answer is that they can declare both creatures or neither creature. In this case, there are no requirements to attack. So all they have to do is not violate any restrictions. The restrictions are that Ember Beast can't attack alone. So they cannot declare one Ember Beast, but they can declare both or neither. Question 3.
Stephen, do you think you could read out the question as well, just in case people are, on their phones and can't see the Discord?
So Havoc Festival is like Sulfuric Vortex in that it's going to trigger once for each player. So it will resolve twice, and each time it resolves, the team will lose half their life total. So it'll go from 27 to 13, and then 13 to 6. Question 4. I should be getting audio from Discord. I don't think anyone else is unmuted, though. Oh, Isaac suggested I read out the question as well. Cool. So this is a game of Two-Headed Giant. How can teammates sideboard? So normally there's no game 2 of a Two-Headed Giant match because teams play until somebody has won one game. But if their first game is a draw, then they will play game 2. And for game 2, they have a shared sideboard, and they can sideboard from that pool. Final question. In a sanctioned Two-Headed Giant event, when time is up in the round, what happens at the end of the current turn? At the end of the current turn, the teams take a total of 3 additional turns. So congratulations to Caleb, who has the top score on the quiz. Yeah, Two to Join Constructed is just a terrible format. Thank you all for attending. I hope you all know Twitter Giant better than you did before.